The Echoes in the Woods. Josh stood at the edge of the familiar forest, the place where his father had taught him everything about the wilderness. The towering pines whispered secrets in the wind, and the earthy smell of moss and pine needles brought back a flood of memories. Every summer, they had camped here, away from the noise of the town, away from everything but the chirping crickets and the crackling campfires. But now, with his father gone, the forest felt different. It was still the same place, unchanged, timeless. But to Josh, it felt both comforting and alien, like revisiting a dream long forgotten. As dusk began to settle, he pitched his tent in the small clearing they had always used. The trees seemed to close in, creating a cocoon of darkness. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. But Josh found solace in it. This was where he felt closest to his father. He built a small fire and sat by it, watching the flames dance, lost in thoughts of the past. The first sound came just as he was drifting off to sleep. It was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of leaves, a faint whisper carried by the wind. Josh dismissed it as his imagination and pulled the sleeping bag tighter around himself. But then he heard it again, clearer this time, a low murmur that seemed to circle the tent. Josh, he froze. The voice was distant, yet unmistakable. His name whispered as if carried on the breath of the forest itself. He listened intently, holding his breath, but all he could hear was the steady crackle of the dying fire. Must be the wind, he muttered to himself, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. He lay back down, forcing his eyes shut, willing himself to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. A scream tore through the night, sharp and piercing. Josh sat bolt upright, his heart hammering in his chest. The scream was followed by another, and then another, overlapping and echoing through the trees. It was impossible to tell where they were coming from or how far away they were. Josh, the whisper came again, closer now, almost inside his head. It was his father's voice, or at least it sounded like it. But that couldn't be. His father was dead, buried in the cemetery back in town. His rational mind told him it was impossible. But the part of him that had spent years in this forest, learning to trust its sounds and silences, knew something was wrong. He unzipped the tent slowly, his hand trembling. The night was cold, colder than it should have been in the middle of summer. The fire had burnt down to embers, casting a dim, flickering light. Beyond the circle of light, the darkness seemed almost alive, shifting and pulsing as if it were breathing. Josh stepped out, his breath misting in the frigid air. The forest was eerily silent now, the screams replaced by a thick, oppressive quiet. He took a cautious step forward, his boots crunching on the gravelly soil. Josh. This time, the voice was directly behind him. He spun around, expecting to see someone, something, but there was nothing, just the empty forest, the skeletal branches of the trees swaying gently in the breeze. His breath came in short, panicked bursts as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a shadow flitting between the trees, too quick to be anything human. He squinted, trying to make out what it was, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. His heart raced as he felt a presence, something watching him from the darkness. The screams began again, louder and more frantic. echoing through the forest like the cries of the damned. They seemed to come from all directions, closing in on him. He backed toward the tent, but the ground beneath his feet felt unstable, like it was shifting and changing with every step. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. There was no response, only the endless chorus of screams and the whispering of his name. Closer now. Insistent. He stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling hard onto the ground. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it the scent of decay. The forest, which had once been a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, closing in around him. Desperate, he grabbed the flashlight from his pack and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. But it did little to calm his nerves. The shadows seemed to retreat from the light, only to surge back when he moved the beam away. "Josh." The voice was different now, more guttural, less human. He swung the flashlight wildly, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there, but all he saw was shadows and the occasional flicker of movement. He scrambled to his feet and ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get away. The trees seemed to close in on him, their branches clawing at his clothes, tearing at his skin. The screams followed him, growing louder and more desperate, mingling with the relentless whispering of his name. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed through the underbrush, his mind racing. He stumbled into another clearing, this one unfamiliar. In the center stood an old twisted tree, its bark blackened and gnarled. There was something wrong about it, something that made his skin crawl. He felt a compulsion to move closer, despite the terror gnawing at his gut. As he approached, he saw something hanging from the branches. At first, he thought they were ropes, but as he got closer, he realized they were veins. They pulsed with a sickly red light, twisting and writhing as if alive. The tree itself seemed to be breathing, the trunk expanding and contracting with a deep, rhythmic pulse. "Josh!" The whisper came from the tree this time, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. He took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The veins began to untangle themselves from the branches, snaking down toward him, reaching out with a predatory intent. And then, just as they were about to touch him, everything went silent. The screams, the whispers, the wind, all gone, replaced by an absolute, suffocating quiet. The veins froze in place, inches from his face. For a moment, time seemed to stop, and then, with a sickening lurch, the tree split open, revealing a hollow interior. Inside, suspended in the darkness, was his father, or what was left of him. His face was twisted in a grimace of pain, his eyes wide open but lifeless, his body entwined with the pulsating veins. Josh staggered back, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be his father. But the sight was undeniable, and with it came a flood of memories. Flashes of their camping trips, his father's laughter, his comforting presence, now distorted, twisted by whatever malevolent force controlled this forest. The last thing Josh heard before he blacked out was his father's voice. Not a whisper this time, but a blood-curdling scream, filled with an agony that made the forest itself shudder. The forest echoes. Victoria adjusted her backpack as she trudged through the dense underbrush, the summer sun casting a golden hue over the forest canopy. She could hear the laughter of her classmates not far behind, their voices mingling with the rustle in leaves and distant chirps of birds. They were all excited for this weekend getaway, a break from the drudgery of college life. No exams, no lectures, just nature, freedom, and a night of carefree fun. Among the group was Sam, the joker of the class. His mischievous grin was well known to all, and today he was especially eager to pull off a prank he'd been planning for weeks. He had brought along a small portable speaker, hidden deep within his backpack, and had preloaded it with various eerie sounds. Tonight, around the campfire, he would unveil his grand scheme. As dusk settled, the group set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines. The fire was roaring, crackling, and sending sparks up into the night sky. Victoria sat close to the warmth, sipping on a soda and enjoying the company. They told stories, joked, and indulged in the kind of youthful recklessness that comes when you feel invincible. Sam, waiting for the perfect moment, slipped away from the group unnoticed. He placed the speaker in a dense patch of bushes not far from the campsite. Grinning, he returned to the fire, pretending to listen intently to a ghost story one of the girls was telling. Then, with a flick of his phone, he triggered the first scream. Everyone jumped, some of the girls yelping in surprise. But the shock quickly gave way to nervous laughter as they realized it was just Sam's doing. "Sam, you jerk!" Victoria shouted, her voice still tinged with lingering fear. All right, I'll stop," Sam said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. He turned off the speaker and joined the group again, soaking in the success of his prank. The fire burned lower as the night wore on, and the group began to relax again. Conversations shifted to lighter topics, and the earlier scare was all but forgotten. But then, a second scream shattered the silence. This one was different, raw, real, and coming from deep within the forest. The sound was filled with terror, a voice pleading in a language of pure fear. For a moment, no one moved. Then they all looked at Sam, who was sitting just as frozen as the rest of them. "It wasn't me," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I turned it off." Victoria's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen. The forest, once a symphony of nocturnal life, had gone eerily silent. All she could hear was the distant fading echo of that scream. It was like the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. "Maybe someone's in trouble," one of the guys suggested, his voice shaky. "We should check it out." Reluctantly, the group grabbed their flashlights and headed toward the direction of the scream. The beams of light cut through the thick darkness, revealing nothing but twisted roots and gnarled branches. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew thick, heavy with moisture and the scent of damp earth. Victoria felt a growing unease, her senses on high alert. "Hello?" one of the girls called out, her voice quivering. "Is anyone there?" The group froze, turning their flashlights in the direction of the noise. The light illuminated nothing but empty space. "This isn't funny anymore," Sam muttered, his bravado from earlier completely gone. Victoria could see the fear in his eyes now. Suddenly they heard it again, a scream, but closer this time. It was followed by a low, guttural growl, unlike anything they had ever heard before. Panic set in as they began to retreat, stumbling over roots and rocks in their haste. Victoria felt something cold brush against her arm, and she jerked away, turning her flashlight to see what it was. Nothing, just empty air and shadows. "Run!" someone shouted. And they did, racing back towards the campsite, the forest seeming to close in around them. But the forest was different now. The path they had taken seemed to twist and turn in unnatural ways. Trees they had passed before loomed in the wrong direction, and the undergrowth was thicker, more tangled, followed by the distinct sound of branches snapping underfoot. But the sound wasn't coming from any of them. Victoria's breath came in ragged gasps as she ran, her flashlight flickering as the batteries began to die. She could hear the others ahead of her, their panicked footsteps growing more frantic. And then they burst into the clearing, their campfire a distant glow in the center. But something was wrong. The fire, once warm and welcoming, now flickered with a strange, unnatural blue hue. The tents they had pitched were nowhere to be seen. "Where's our stuff?" one of the girls cried, her voice breaking. Victoria's mind raced. This wasn't possible. They had been gone for only a few minutes, but it felt as if hours had passed, the night growing colder and more sinister. Sam looked around, his face pale. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But as they turned to leave, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his clothes tattered and dirty. His eyes were hollow, as if he hadn't slept in years. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a scream erupted from his throat. The same scream they had heard in the woods. Victoria's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. This man, whoever he was, had been the source of the screams. But something was terribly wrong with him. His movements were jerky, unnatural, as if he were a puppet being controlled by unseen strings. "Run!" Sam shouted again, but it was too late. The figure lunged at them, moving with inhuman speed. Victoria screamed as she felt a cold hand grasp her wrist, yanking her back toward the darkness. The forest echoed with their screams, a chorus of terror that faded into the night as the firelight flickered out.